Peace, good people. Um, welcome, welcome, and thank you for joining us today on this Juneteenth, um, 2021. My name is Leiner. I use they, them, theirs, Black Unicorn, Beloved, Loved One pronouns, and I work with the Newburgh LGBTQ Plus Center, and I'm going to be one of the moderators this evening. And I want to allow my co-moderator, Mia, to introduce herself.
Thank you so much for that, Ray. My name is Mia Edwards. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am work with the Loft in White Plains, New York, and I am so honored to be asked to be a co-moderator on this panel, along with these esteemed panelists, and just deeply touched by this honor.
Thank you for being a thought partner and collaborator, Mia. Also, I want to give a shout out to Jaguar Mary, who is streaming this event at the Queerteenth gathering, Black, trans, and queer folks in Kingston. We are with you. We love you. Beacon for Black Lives is also live streaming this event. So we know that there are more people that this event is reaching than just the numbers we see today. So shout out to my peoples holding it down. Justice McCrae, my homie, I love you, out in Beacon holding it down. And thank you for everyone who came and to be here with us this evening. There have been Juneteenth celebrations all over the place, all over the Mid-Hudson Valley, all over the country, as folks are coming together on this particular day. So we thought we would start off by just giving a little bit of framing around Juneteenth, because now all of a sudden, right, this is a very relevant point that we are going to have to work into the conversation today, because now all of a sudden this is a federal holiday. I know that our panelists have thoughts and feelings about this, and I can't wait to hear your reflections, because I know it's going to be hot fire. But just to let you all know, so when emancipation came in the form of President Lincoln fighting against the South and Southern forces, right? Let's be very, very clear that this was not about the emancipation of Black people for a humanitarian purpose. There are elements there. This is a lot more economic, right? And I would invite you to just do some light research to know that when Lincoln met with delegates, Black delegates, most of what was being talked about was that Black people were to blame for the strife of emancipation, right? And there was talk about sending people back to Africa, even though we have been far removed from roots there, because the problem of the Negro was the Negro, right? So again, Google this, do you some Google searches. Don't just believe all the things that I tell you. Information is literally at the tips of your fingers. You have handheld computers right here, right? So essentially, when emancipation came in Texas, that information was denied to Black people in Texas for at least, what was it, 2 years before folks even knew about their emancipation, right? Not until I think it was a Northern general like rode through Texas and was letting people know that they were freed men. So can you imagine that emancipation came, but white supremacy's stronghold is so strong that you don't actually know that you have been freed, right? That emancipation has come for you. So the first Juneteenth celebrations came about a year after emancipation came for folks in Texas as a way to commemorate the fact that this was their emancipation had come, right? And so this originates in Texas, which is ironic because Kenyon Farrow, one of our panelists, is actually in Texas right now. And so that's got to be lit because actually it's Black Pride outside his window. And I just have to say that I think Erykah Badu is on the ones and twos is what I heard. And so I am so appreciative of Kenyon being here right now, because if I were him, and I said this before, I'd be like, I'm sick. And go and shake my butt out by the pool. So thank you, Kenyon, for being here and for having integrity with us to be here on this day, literally in the place, in the belly of the beast, right? Inside of the space. And let's not get it twisted too. Most of our Black trans folks are living in Texas. My family lives in Texas. My brother lives in Texas, right? Texas got a lot of diversity, a lot of beauty, and it has a lot of history, strong history, with a lot of legislation, actions that are pretty detrimental to the bodies of Black folks and get even more complicated at the intersections of Blackness, transness, queerness, right? So we just want to turn it over to the panelists now to introduce yourselves, and to just tell us a little bit about what Juneteenth has meant to you, growing up or being an adult and at this present moment. And so I really want to turn it over to Dominique first and bring Dominique onto the mic, and then we will move on from there.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dominique Morgan, pronouns are she and her. I think it's so interesting. I grew up hearing about Juneteenth in like the spirit of why we come together on this day, but not the roots in our community. And I think as a person who early on in my queer experience felt as though I had to choose if I could be a really like awesome queer person or a really great Black person, and that being like a really great Black person wasn't accessible to me, that I continued to be indoctrinated that like these existences inside of me were like so far apart. And I think what I'm sitting with, what I'm holding right now is how intrinsically connected Blackness and queerness is. And this idea of fighting, this idea of breaking down barriers, this idea of nurturing, of loving, of building. Just as much as we're tearing down, we're trying to build something new at the same time and dream about what we want to have built tomorrow. Like that is Blackness, that is queerness. And I just had this aha. I did a piece for Global Citizen. I did their op-ed for Juneteenth, and it came out today. And I'm like, why didn't I realize before like this last couple of months, like Juneteenth and Pride are in the same month for a reason? And I just see a whole, you know what I'm saying? I just see a whole room of like queer folks, 54 years ago talking about, I wonder like when they're gonna catch this time capsule that like we was like kind of intentional. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I don't think we as people don't do things by accident. Sometimes we think we're super clever and we wait till somebody gets the inside joke. But I just feel like Black queer folks over history have had these ahas, and I'm ready for us to have a collective aha and have a collective space in a moment where we're just like, we're pulling each other in as much as we're trying to push each other away until we can pull each other in more than we're pushing each other away. And so that's what I'm holding. I'm so excited to be here. Y'all know I love y'all at Newburgh. Kenyon, idolize Kenyon. Like, I'm not going to even do that because I'm not about to mess up my good Fenty blur. I'm not going to do it. Mac, this is our first time holding space, I believe, but I'm so excited to be here, and everybody just here today. I'm just thankful. So that's what I'm holding.
Thank you, Dominique, for the good word. So I'm gonna pass it to Kenyon next.
Hey everybody, Kenyon Farrow. I have a lot of affiliations. Run through them real quick. Been well, currently the kind of outgoing co-ED with Partners for Dignity and Rights, but I'm gonna join the board because they still my homies. And the new managing director of advocacy and organizing with Prep for All, and also serve on 3 boards. I'm on the board of NITAG in New York, New York Transgender Advocacy Group. Shout out to Kiara St. James and the crew there. Also on the board of the LGBT Center of Greater Cleveland. Cleveland, Ohio is my hometown. I moved back to Cleveland a year ago. I'm really excited to be back home and doing work locally. And on the board of another new organization, Global Black Gay Men Connect, which started out of a conversation of Black gay men across the globe in the United States, in the UK, and Europe, and in the Caribbean and in Africa, talking about how we needed to actually organize and do things together outside of HIV Inc., outside of Gay Inc. And next Friday is our second annual started, and that will be happening online as well. So I'll talk about Juneteenth and kind of what it means to me. I've known about Juneteenth a kind of good chunk of my life. My mom, was the kind of Black mama that made sure we knew, significant figures in Black history. We knew significant moments in Black history. We knew the famous Langston Hughes Dream Deferred poem we had to recite, so we were taught about the history of Juneteenth early. I think for me now, thinking about what it means. I think it's been interesting, even before becoming a federal holiday yesterday, to see how much Juneteenth's importance in the Black community, regardless of the state, recognition, has been growing over the years. There were already Juneteenth, celebrations planned, even in Cleveland, my hometown, about as far, very far north from Texas, but there were already Juneteenth Black queer folks in Cleveland are doing Juneteenth events this weekend. So that has been, exciting. And I think to me, what it represents is, the journey of liberation, right? That we know how hard it is. Black people have to fight for, legislation, policy, and things to change. But we know that liberation, often takes more than just, a policy change or a legal change. It could take generations for that to feel real. And so to me, thinking about just that fact from, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation through the Civil War ending, and then through, Juneteenth, and even the things that happened after Juneteenth, right? We still know the flotilla that brought slaves into the port of Alabama after, long after that was supposed to be legal. We know all the things that happened through Jim Crow, et cetera, that we are still on a path of actual liberation. And this is one marker of how Black people have always continued to fight, in addition to the ways in which state may recognize or kind of allow for certain kinds of, freedom, or for different kinds of legal changes. So that's it. And I'm very glad to be here with you all, and we'll pass it on. Thank you.
We would really love to bring Mac's voice into the space.
Wow, I'm just honored to be here, and I'm really grateful to be alongside such brilliant folk. My name is Malkia Devich Cyril. Everybody calls me Mac, so everybody should feel free to do so. I'm the founding ED at Media Justice. I now serve as a senior fellow at that organization after about 20 years of running it. I've been working for the last 30 years in service to Black liberation through, I think, a variety of ways, through media activism, community organizing, and direct action. I started a new project that doesn't really, I haven't, it's so under wraps still, but I'll share it here. It's called the Radical Loss Movement, and it was inspired by the journey that I went on after my wife was diagnosed with the terminal cancer, and then died in October 2018 after a 2-year battle with cancer. And one of the reasons that I'm starting this new work to confront the criminalization of Black grief and the disenfranchisement of Black grief is because when I look at a moment, at a celebration like Juneteenth, some people might see it as a celebration of unabashed joy, but I see it as a grief practice. I see this celebration as one as a response to grief. They talk about as a response to loss. They talk about grief as any response to loss. That means all responses to loss. And what Juneteenth has always meant to me is the heavy joy that one feels at the point of recognizing and realizing one's own freedom, grabbing hold of one's own freedom. And that is still a massive change. If you have experienced generational slavery, and then the transformation from slave to free, it's not a single day. You know what I mean? It's not a day. It's not a moment. It's a journey. And it's a journey that involves tremendous loss. It's a journey that involves tremendous loss. And our response to that loss, whether we dance in the street or whether we cry at the table, it's all grief. It's all grief. And so that's how I see Juneteenth. I also see Juneteenth as a practice of abolition. We talk about abolition, very much as an ideology, as a way of thinking, but I think it's a way of being. And I think that practicing Juneteenth, practicing that deep acknowledgement of freedom is a part of that practice of abolition. And I think the last thing I'll say is this, unlike Kwanzaa, which, my family celebrates Kwanzaa, we celebrate everything Black, my mother was a member of the Black Panther Party. My father was a member of the Black Liberation Army, both in New York City. And the thing is that unlike Kwanzaa, which, as we know, was created by a CIA informant, and yet we celebrate it because, holiday can come from a lot of different places. But unlike that, Juneteenth wasn't created. Juneteenth was acknowledged. I don't know if you can feel me what I mean by that. You know what I mean? Like nobody went to the side and figured out, let's do this and that. It was more of an acknowledgement of a historical moment, of a historical period, something that actually happened. And I feel that anytime we get a chance to truly acknowledge history, that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. And so I love a holiday that is an acknowledgement of Black history. So that's kind of how I think about it. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think everybody who is here right now just got a little taste of the depth of which this conversation is about to take with these panelists who are here, Kenyon and Mac and Dominique, who are bringing unique perspectives to this piece of the conversation, right? So thank you all for that, for those introductions. One thing we wanted to ask you all briefly was just, why does this conversation about Black liberation, right? Because we're talking about Juneteenth, and when I think of Juneteenth, I think of liberation. I think of Black liberation, right? And I really appreciate the framing that you brought, Mac, just talking about that acknowledgement of grief, right? Like it kind of reminds me of my family on my matrilineal side are from New Orleans. And so when we do funerals, it's not somber, it's a celebration, right? It's a celebration of somebody's life. It is food, it is regale, it is music. There is moments of grief wrapped with moments of joy. It is, it is tradition. And so, it brings up this piece about how we're looking at and understanding this processing of grief, right? I really appreciate that. And y'all check our Facebook page, because Mac just wrote a very brilliant article, and we will repost that article for you all to read, to get a sense of the work that they are doing, which is very, very rich. So we wanted to get a sense from you all about this intersection around Black liberation and queer liberation, right? I really appreciated what Dominique had to say about there's no coincidence, about, resistance happening in June. So why do you think that Black liberation intrinsically is connected to queer liberation? Right. I'm looking at Dominique. I'm feeling the energy. I don't know if you want to pop off first, or if somebody else does and feels eager.
Chad, the first thing I just thought of is like, first of all, I feel like it happened in June because when we get hot, we get tired of shit. When we get hot, there's a lot of stuff we'll deal with when the temperature is a certain way, but we just hot. It's like, girl, oh, we've been doing this. Girl, it's just this moment where there's just the simplest thing that you had dealt with before. When Black folks get uncomfortable when it comes to weather, honey, a revolution will take place. This idea that there are portions of who we are that can be described as nothing, that can be itemized as property, that can be labeled as illegal, is frightening. And as Black queer people, in our DNA has been the repetitive experience of understanding that about us, right? And when I think about this idea of, the space of Stonewall, when it's like literally your existence is illegal, as someone who, there was a time in my life, as someone who navigated the criminal justice system as a young person, as an adult, and even in this body I'm in now, where it's like, as an abolitionist, a part of my work in my body to protect myself is to avoid engaging with the system. So being as law-abiding as possible, I cannot comprehend in my mind my existence not being law-abiding. And what does one do, right? And on the flip side, I can't stand people who talk about the outcome and don't talk about how you started it. Who will talk about what I did, but don't talk about what you did to me. And it's like, I don't believe that people wake up and like, I want to protest. I want to sacrifice my body, possibly the body of the people that I love, the spirits of people that I love and myself, to try to get some crumb of a quality experience. We're not seeking respect. I think this idea that we can get them to respect us is something we need to divest from. They don't give a fuck. They don't like us. They have no respect for us. The idea of accountability, I don't know who I was on a panel with, my God, but I was on a panel for the Transgender Law Center, and the person said, how can you hold someone accountable when they don't believe that you have the power to hold them accountable? So we got to divest from that. It's like, we're fighting for just like, I just want you to leave me alone and let me do me. And that's what I get stuck with. Is like, this is what Max said about the acknowledgement was so beautiful. And I hope somebody like puts that into a thing and makes that an image, because we have to acknowledge the fact that people fought and died for us just to be left the fuck alone. Right? And I think that's what's hard, is that we're just like, we're still fighting to be just left alone. We haven't even gotten to like our list of demands. We haven't even gotten to our requests. When you saw those Black folks down there with President Biden, so excited for him to sign that paper, it wasn't that they were just like, oh, they're sellouts. The truth is they've never had the space to dream what their Blackness meant and what they really wanted. And so this is what they're being offered. And so they're going to be happy with it. When I was 10 years old, my father got me a book about basketball. I was like, well, this is what I'm being given. I'll be happy with it. Ain't what I wanted. because I didn't have time to dream it. And so that's where I sit. It's like we need to be investing strong time into dreaming about what do we want and what can we have that is not predicated on white people and systems of harm giving us the go-to to do it, right? I think that's kind of a scary place of with Juneteenth being a federal holiday is that it's always been our holiday. We always was gonna give you the girl, we're not coming in on the 19th. It was a work day. Like it was always, you see what I'm saying? Like, girl, like it was always our holiday. And now it's kind of like the thing that was ours, it feels like it was slightly co-opted. And I can also see folks who are excited for like the establishment of what happened, on I think it was Thursday. But this is all about us saying, leave us alone, let us love each other. Let us figure out what liberation and joy looks like for us. I don't know how you have the capacity to dream and think about liberation when you're being murdered for just walking. How do I pull myself up by my like these things are real and valid. And so in that space of liberation, freedom, the significance of a day like today, the significance of Pride Month, it all resonates too. We're just saying, let us figure our stuff out. Let us love each other. Let me love myself and just get out of my way. If all you can do is get out of my way, baby, I will do the rest. And we're still being told no. We're still being gaslit to believe that we're asking for too much. And I think it's at a time where we can't let another generation of young people be positioned to live a life that's essentially in an abusive relationship. Essentially this space where these young folks are saying, this is what I want, and the world is saying you're asking for too much. And they're like, nah, like this is some basic stuff I'm asking for. We can't allow this to happen for another group of people to be talking about this 20 years from now.
Thank you. Just a little word for us, just a little. I want to pass it over to Mac, also because I just love seeing Luna, my favorite panelist.
You know, she cannot. Yeah, she just cannot stay out the panel. She just can't. It don't matter what, Anyway, here's Luna. I think it's a great question. I want to answer it this way. The greatest violence I've ever experienced on an interpersonal level has been the violence of Black men. And I think it's important to say that because I think that's patriarchy has done its work within Black communities. And I bring this up for this reason. Juneteenth and quote unquote pride, or I'm gonna call it queer liberation, So the liberation of Black bodies and the liberation of queer bodies are predicated on the same basic truth, right? Which is the value that we have, inherent value. The oppression of Black bodies and the oppression of queer bodies, queer and trans bodies, are predicated on similar truths as well, right? The lack of value. And so, and I think that that within Black community, now I'm not even talking about everybody else, I'm talking about within Black community, I have been taught through action, right, through experience, that the kind of Black I am does not have value within other parts of my Black community. Now, despite that, I have chosen to work for Black liberation because I understand it does not matter whether or not some component of Black community is invested in patriarchy. It doesn't matter, doesn't mean that I get to turn my back or walk away. It doesn't change what I need to do for my liberation. You feel me? Am I making sense? Like that the fact that actually what queerness opens up is an acknowledgement and a recognition of the role that gender and race and class and how they all play into each other to form a full self. And the fact that you can't deny any one part of that, right? And I don't want to talk about it in just the terms that we normally use, like intersectionality, just because I feel like it's overplayed. You know, people use that term all the time. What I'm saying is that the violence we commit against one another is the violence we commit against ourselves. And the place where we need to build that wholeness, the place where we need to demand change is both out there, but it's also in here. It's also in here. And so for me, that's part of what Juneteenth, you know, and queer liberation is all about for me, is a reckoning within Black communities. It's a reckoning within Black communities that we get to have this joy, but we can only get this joy, you know, like I said, I believe that grief is a practice and it's not all sorrow. Sorrow is one part of it, joy is another, and that we have to walk through this grief together. We have to walk through it together because patriarchy has done its work on all of us. You feel me? On all of us. And so that's, you know, that's how I see the relationship. I see it as I see the connections as one of building a Black feminism, a kind of Black feminism that brings us into our understanding that patriarchy is as much our enemy as white supremacy. And so that is how I see those things as part and parcel of one another.
Yeah, I think for me, if I could, coming off of that, Mac, I think that like Black queer folks have actually offered so many examples throughout our history of that connection and the ability to choose one's body, one's sexual and reproductive relationships, one's family, if you will, in ways. I really love my favorite book of Angela Davis's is Blues, Legacies, and Black Feminism, where she talks about, kind of the history of coming, after chattel slavery. And it should be no surprise that we begin to see, the Ma Rainey's and Bessie Smiths, coming out of that period where one of the things that really that people really kind of needed for themselves was the ability to move, right, freely as they chose to, as much as they could, right, which so much of early blues music is about moving, right? Robert Johnson, got to keep on moving. Blues falling down like rain. There's a hellhound on my trail. Those kind of, and then obviously, so that, and then also the ability to love and have sex with whoever you wanted to. Ma Rainey, Prove It On Me blues, right? This was a part of Black freedom, what it meant to end chattel control over one's body, sexual and reproductive life, one's ability to actually move from one place to another gets embodied in that music. Obviously, the Harlem Renaissance, right? You have, the Langston Hughes, the County Cullens, of Claude McKay's, who are all also like socialists, right, were also and very much baited around their kind of connections to socialist and communist sort of movements and organizations, right? But they were pushing within the space of the sort of Black academia and Black literary world, new thinking about what it meant to be Black, right? And which included women who were sexually empowered, included queer people, et cetera, in the space of their work. And then we obviously know more about the the Bayard Rustins, and we go, kind of go further in the history. So I really think that the connection is part and parcel of actual Black history that Black queer folks have actively pushed, both in the sort of policy and legal and real politic, but also culturally pushing Black people to think about their own bodies and their relationships to love, family, sex, community in different ways, right? Throughout our history in this country. And lastly, when I think about, kind of what you offered, Mac, about the having to deal with that, I think about it as grief too. The reality that in my personal life, the people that have I have endured the most kind of trauma from has been like heterosexual Black men throughout my life, right? And so part of my work, has been to try to help Black folks, really, especially Black folks who are straight or straight identified and cisgender, to think about the ways in which white supremacy also makes their actual physical bodies vulnerable in particular ways. So when, I have been in situations and working with Black men talking about like criminalization of like pants sagging laws, right? So we think about that and think about what it means to have people constantly like viewing your body as a particular threat and as a sexual threat, right? Because that's really what all of that is based on. No one is concerned about white women in Lululemon yoga pants, which are frankly far more revealing than anybody's pants sagging I ever saw, right? But that doesn't get, and I'm not saying that I want it to be criminalized, but you know what I'm saying? But you just think about the actual optics of them both are very, very different and what they actually animate. And so when I get like straight Black men to actually consider that and get them to actually talk about their own relationships and their own histories with dealing with police, it actually surfaces a lot of things that they feel actually sexually violated around. And so if we can get folks to then think about their own sort of vulnerability in that space, and then to then think about what it means for cis women, for trans folks, for femmes, for gay men, et cetera, also having to navigate Black space, I think we can then open up a space where folks can come to some new understandings about like what the role that they can have in actually making the Black community whole for everybody, as opposed to gatekeeping and controlling which bodies, get to kind of operate as much as possible. So those are the things that I think that kind of like queer liberation and Black liberation for me have in common.
Thank you so much for that, Kenya. I thought that was a very powerful statements you had made about the vulnerabilities of various identities, and coupled on top of what Mac had shared about some of the greatest violence that ever experienced coming from Black men, Black cis men, and also Dominique, when you talked about you can't have liberation when you can't exist just being who and what you are, which kind of like begs a deeper dive or a deeper question on, what are we losing when we don't include all Black identities towards the struggle for liberation? And I was wondering, what does that mean for you, Dominique?
I mean, I think that it's not going to be, so I'm a literal person in a lot of ways, and I have to see things sometimes, like I got to kind of bring it into my mind. It's kind of like, have y'all had some chicken that clearly was breaded, but it was slightly seasoned, and it was all right. But like 20 minutes later, you're like, oh, that was all right. But compared to that chicken where the brown bag has been in the bottom of your mama's refrigerator for about 2 weeks with the flour in it, and it's got every season you can imagine, and then you'll eat, and then like 20 minutes later, you're sitting there watching TV, and a kernel of seasoning will pop up out of your tooth, and you be like, that chicken was really hitting on something. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Tell me about that.
The after orgasm of a good piece of chicken, huh? Hey, man. It was because everything was there to make the chicken the best it was. So it's long lasting. It's memorable. It's something that the majority of the people who are experiencing the chicken will be like, this chicken is fire, right? It's hitting on something. You can take that chicken anywhere and people are gonna be like, okay, you know what? This is doing something. Now I may partner this chicken with my version of potato salad. I may partner this chicken with some hot chips because I like hot chips with my chicken. But the chicken is a universal thing where everybody can get around and be like, you know what? I live for it. When I think of like this idea of liberation and Black liberation that doesn't include all Black people, it's never going to be long lasting. We'll always be in a situation where we have an Oprah, where we have a few basketball players and 1 or 2 Black people per generation that are accessing this idea of what does it mean liberated from a capitalist perspective. But all them bitches are miserable too. How your man live in the back of the house, niece? Right? Like no, like right. So like that. So like this, and so their access to liberation is clearly from a capitalist lens, and we know that's not the be all end all, right? And so it will never be long lasting. It will never be in a situation where, like with a good chicken recipe, somebody's going to make sure somebody carries it to the next generation. Nobody wants Grammy to go and us not know how to make that thing that we all got to have when grandma gone, right? So that means also that the next generation is taking that recipe of liberation. They're adding their thing to it, but they're taking it on and it continues to live. So as long as it's this microsphere of a liberated, like this definition of liberation for Blackness that's centered in heteronormative behaviors, which as a sexual health educator, so many Black folks are not having good orgasms because of white supremacy. The number of orgasms that y'all have divested from because white people have told y'all that's not how you have an orgasm and be a good person. It's I'm sad for you, right? So like this whole idea of what we're chasing. So we're creating a Black liberation definition predicated on this idea of what does it mean to be a good Black person from the perspective of the people who have caused Black people as a whole the most harm. So our liberation definition is attached to that. We got to break it open. So to wrap it up, it's not long lasting. It's not something that everyone sees as something that's valuable. And even if you're talking about this great thing, but people can't at a glance see the value in it, they're not going to get on board with it, which means that the numbers are less. So that means that some of y'all who see the power in it aren't even going to make it to liberation because it's 5 of y'all working to get there and only 2 of y'all make it instead of it being 100 of us, right? And last but not least, it's going to be inherently replicated, mirrored in a vision of whiteness. And nothing rooted in whiteness is ever going to be good for Black people. It's ever going to feel nurturing. It's ever going to feel like it's meant for us to, again, our goal of like Black liberation is not for us to be better than white people. Like that's a truth that exists, niece. The idea of Black liberation is like, we're not trying to overdo or overtop someone else. We're trying to just have our dopeness together. And so if y'all think that y'all can have the best place in the world and not have queer folks, not have Black queer folks, not have Black trans folks, then you're sadly mistaken. And so for my cisgender, straight identified Black family out there, you being invested in a definition of Blackness that centers me, that centers Kenyon, that centers Mac, that centers Ray, centers Mia, is going to benefit us, but it's also going to make it better for you. And so quit cock blocking your own self and get with the program.
Mother has spoken. I really love that. I mean, I do agree that, our liberation is incomplete unless we do have all Black identities. And I love that chicken analogy so much. And it really resonates with me. And nothing could be further from the truth. So I'd like to pass it over to Mac to hear their thoughts on the same question. What are we losing when we don't include all Black identities from your perspective?
Well, let's be clear. First of all, I'm very hungry now, and I blame you, Dominique. I want some chicken, and I don't know if we can even continue on with this panel, without chicken being delivered. But okay, on to the real question. I feel like you said it all, sis. You said it all. Like there's not that much that I'm going to add to it that hasn't already been said. Let me say this. I think that I'm a stud. I identify as a stud. I'm 47, so there was a time when I also identified as a butch. These are generational terms, or you know what I mean. And I firmly believe. I want to talk a little bit about, because we talked about Black heterosexual folk and Black queer and trans folk, but I want to also talk about some of the Black lesbians who are older, who are rejecting Black trans women. And I want to say something about that because I think it's actually part of the same discussion. I think that this piece where we don't understand that liberation is for everybody, that part, where we don't understand that Black liberation mean Black liberation, not like Black liberation for people with money, but not for people without money, or Black liberation for this kind of women, but not that kind of women. Like, that's not what it said. It said Black liberation. And so I think that it's not just something that our cisgender and heterosexual folk need to learn. It's something that, our elder lesbians, and not just elder, but, folks who identify in some ways, who think about lesbianism in a particular way, those folks, I understand that this is the job patriarchy has done. Okay. Because on the one hand, folk are afraid to lose what few rights they have. And on the other hand, they believe that somehow there is a contest, that they can only have these rights and whatever if somebody else doesn't have them. And so I think that way of thinking, that way of looking at the human body, at the human experience, is fundamentally deeply flawed. It's so deeply flawed, not just because it's out of step with the politics of our time, but because every time Black liberation will suffer under that way of thinking about it, right? That Black liberation is only for some Black people and not for all Black people, or that queer and trans liberation is only for, you know what I'm saying? Like that's the point, that we all get to have it. And I think the last thing that I'll say here is this. I think, as a Black masculine of center, person, I think, for example, about radical masculinity, and I think that Black studs, butchers, and trans men actually pave a way for anyone who identifies as a man to think differently about masculinity, to think about manhood and masculinity not as something that's predicated on the subjugation of the female body or the female identity or the female gender. You understand what I'm saying? And that, to me, is an offering. That's a gift that we have to give to the movement, for Black liberation, is a new way of thinking about manhood, masculinity, that is about true liberation. And so that's where I think there's opportunities in that for me. I'll pass it off.
Mia, just first of all, Mac, you just truly blessed me. And send me your address. I have some chicken delivered immediately. Because I believe, honey, in compensating folks for them blessed moments. I want to add to that space of decentering, because people have struggled with this lately in like conversations I've been having within like the Black trans community, for Black trans women, who are just like, well, if a person is a Black trans woman and they have a beard, we're feeling like, well, we have to decry this person because them having a beard makes it less valid of our womanhood and our identity. And this space of, we need to practice decentering ourselves and recognizing that being decentered doesn't mean that you are not involved. Some of the best, we've all been to weddings where it's been one of the littest parties we've ever been to. You didn't walk down the aisle. You weren't the one that had that proposed. You weren't the one doing the vows, but you were there. You got to celebrate, right? some black ass stuff. You go into a kid's party, it's a kid's 5-year-old party. By the time it's 10 o'clock, it's the most lit adult party you'll ever go to in your life. It didn't start with the adults, but they still got the experience. Decenter yourself as a goal. Learn to do that, because you can be like, yo, I'm here. Yo, if this is benefiting this person, it's absolutely going to benefit me, because you're right, like we have to do that first. And we have to do it in a way that to really be excited about it, because Mac, what you said is so real. It's like, we can really do a lot of this stuff without any white folks in the room, without any of them signing a law, giving approval, if we do our individual shadow work. And then like one day just pop up and be like, ta-da, y'all thought we needed to wait for y'all, but actually we got this figured out.
No words. Dominique, thank you so much for that critical analysis of Mac's share. Kenyon, do you want to give us your perspective on this?
I think, so to me, I think, what is lost is kind of related to my previous comments, that I think that, Black queer folks' ability to choose, again, how we want to inhabit our bodies, how we want to inhabit our desire or reproduction, how we want to inhabit our chosen families and communities, I think is actually a gift and a pathway to the entire Black community. And so when I was working with Queers for Economic Justice some years ago, and when we were doing, organizing around, say, like welfare benefits, right? And a lot of people, and particularly a lot of funders, did not understand why this LGBT organization gave a damn about welfare, right? And part of it was that, first of all, part of the reason the organization started was because after the, Welfare Reform Act in 1995-96, signed by Bill Clinton, one of the things that law did was allow states to require a father to be written on the birth certificate in order for that woman to be able to get welfare and other benefits. And so what started to happen in New York City was case managers and social workers, people who work in social services started to come together because they started to see a lot of lesbians and queer women who were in relationships, some of whom had children, and the partner, who was not the sort of biological, quote unquote, parent of the child, was choosing to go into the New York City shelter system in order to make sure that those benefits kept going to that household, because they were afraid that if it was, a caseworker showed up at the house and it was discovered 2 women were living there, then given those new sort of birth requirements to identify the sperm donor, essentially, they were going to cause harm, economically to the family. And so I say that and use that as an example to say that when I think about, kind of queer liberation within the context of Black liberation, I'm also thinking about the kind of stigma that poor Black women who are single moms have to deal with in this society, right? And all the pressures of knowing or not knowing who the father is and all of these kind of things. I think that queerness offers us a way past that, right? And a way to think about family creation beyond genetic donors, right? So to speak. And so to me, I think what we lose when we lose a kind of queer liberation within the context of Black liberation, we lose the ability for all Black people to be able to consciously embody and choose the body they want to inhabit, the sexual and reproductive relationships they want to have, the families that they want to choose, and the communities that they want to participate in, and in what context, right? And so I see those things as absolutely, linked.
I think that's a brilliant observation, Kenyon. Thank you so much for that. Ray, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm just catching my breath, gathering myself as I am feeling myself lost in this conversation and having new ideas, new epiphanies, and just reaffirming, like feeling reaffirmed in either thoughts, ideas, notions, or conversations that I myself have had before. So I appreciate that. And it looks like Dominique might have had some connectivity issues, but no worries. I'm sure she will be back, or maybe she's still here. But yeah, sorry, y'all. The technology is doing all kinds of things.
I'm here, y'all. My cord needs to be plugged in, or I was gonna have to go away, but
Fair.
I was trying to be classy about it.
No, you was good. You was good. It was me being like, "Where'd you go?" Okay. So all this conversation that you all have been having, which again, the chicken metaphor also has me hungry too. And I think honestly, my chicken recipe is a little bit better than my mom's. I love you, Mom. Just a little bit. I just add a little bit more paprika than her. That's all. That's all. No worries. When I come out to the West Coast, Mac, I will straight up make you some chicken. And gluten-free too, Holmes. Like I got you. But it brings me into this place about you all are people who are part of social justice, not just social justice, but actually like liberation movements, right? Like abolitionist based movements, Black liberation movements, Black queer liberation movements. And so I'm just wondering and thinking about how does a day like Juneteenth influence or inform your work towards Black liberation? And in particular, where have you been in spaces that have challenged you to create, I guess, to find the space to create space for talking about and bringing in queerness in this Black liberation struggle, right? Like, I think last year, there was a lot of, we all know that it was a summer of rebellion, right? And for people who may have never cared about a Black life, or whether or not they were Black, white, or Black, right? People of color or Black folks, right? Didn't go out into the streets, never went out to proclaim any of their disdain towards this system of injustice, right? I know I was in a lot of spaces where I had lots of conversations, especially with cisgendered Black men, about, why are you asking things why are you asking things like, what are my pronouns? You lost me there with that. Or why are you questioning, why are we having conversations about violence? And why is this a thing that we have to address? Right. And why is it that all the people in this space are queer or women that are coming for strategy, that are coming to build? Right. And I have to appreciate the fam that were in those spaces to be like, we show up for you regardless. We show up for you without question. We show up for you when something happens to you. Right. We show up no matter what the circumstances are. So it begs this question, and y'all started to talk about it, and I just wanted to take us a little bit deeper. What have been some of those challenges that you have faced in the struggle for Black liberation to make sure that queer and trans folks are included in those spaces? What are lessons that you might have learned that can help support people? Because I know people on this call are dealing with that. I know it. So I'm just wondering, what good word could you drop? I already see Kenyon already. I was already on, like, I have a good word, so I'm gonna be quiet now.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. One of the challenges for me in the last 20 plus years, I've been, doing organizing and social justice work. And I've seen some change happen, but, when I started, as a prison abolitionist in my mid-20s, working for critical resistance, and having, a lot of challenges with, kind of cis and straight Black folks, men and women, frankly, wondering what I was doing there in the space, or why I wasn't kind of quietly gay or quietly, but that I actually, talked about, my own identity and Black gay men in relationship to the prison industrial complex and criminalization and et cetera. And, and it was really hard in a lot of cases. I think one of the things I will say that I in some specific cases, I see just having, being in those spaces, and even when it was difficult, continuing those relationships as much as possible. Like, as long as folks weren't, completely dismissive and abusive in their language or whatever to me or whatever, but just figuring out how to stay in relationship with folks and seeing how folks have kind of come around in certain ways, I think is, so one of it, I think about, organizing is relational, and it's not a one-off, it's not a tweet, it's not any of that shit, right? It's really about a long-term strategy, vision, and relationship. But more specifically, recently, as an example, I would say is, I've been very frustrated as, somebody who's also worked in the AIDS movement for, as long as I have criminal justice work or whatever. And frankly, I have been, I almost want to cry now talking about just the ways in which I feel like the space in which HIV takes up in the Black community as a real, kind of issue and an ongoing sort of public health crisis. And to see the ways in which, Black organizations skirt around, avoid, won't engage, won't talk about it. I've been on so many panel discussions with, nationally known, Black academics, activists and organizers, et cetera. And I talk about HIV, and, people will quietly after the panel come up to me and say, thank you for talking about that, because my mother, my aunt, my brother, my uncle died, this, that, and whatever. Or if people quietly email me and say, hey, my uncle is living in New York City and his housing assistance is going to get cut off. Can you help him? But will not make this a part of their political work at all, right? At all. And where they are very willing to do that in the case of talking about relatives who are in prison, et cetera, et cetera. But that seems to be a kind of a line that folks cannot bridge. And in the last year, what has been interesting is that in the context of COVID, because we're dealing with another pandemic, an infectious disease, where that was disproportionately impacting Black folks, that all of a sudden organizations that I had tried to for years engage, talk to, do work with, try to engage the issue of HIV or public health more writ large, who generally would not, all of a sudden started to call because they needed somebody who understood public health systems, who understand, and also because of, 7-8 years ago, I made it my business to learn how the NIH works, how drug approval works, how supply chains and drug development work, all this kind of stuff. So, so then all of a sudden I became valuable to groups who would not engage around HIV, but wanted my expertise to understand kind of how vaccines got made, what happened in these processes, to deal with some of the, kind of vaccine hesitancy, medical mistrust, et cetera, around these issues. And I have avoided as much as I wanted to with my, 5 planet and Scorpio self, and be petty and say, where the fuck were you when I was asking y'all to help around HIV? I avoided doing that and just took people up on those opportunities to make myself available to, teach, instruct, to give strategy about how to deal with some of the, COVID sort of criminalization of not social distancing or wearing masks that we were seeing in Black communities with police and everything else. So to me, it's, that has been one way in which I have seen, my kind of ability to push. And I'll say too, just on the HIV front, so much of that is about homophobia and transphobia, right? I mean, it's just squarely, it's another manifestation of it. We won't deal with HIV because the implications of sexuality that we are uncomfortable with, right? Queer, trans folks, sex workers, drug users, folks in the community that, like, even still in kind of Black organizing spaces, lip service is paid to, but oftentimes not a lot of actual engagement with folks in those segments of our community. So, that to me is just one example of a way in which the last year, because of a new pandemic, I've been able to try to move some organizations to begin to think about public health and what it means for Black folks more broadly, and try to push them through COVID to actually start to engage HIV, which still hasn't gone anywhere.
Thank you. Dominique, I see you.
So I was probably one of the most anti-Black persons ever in my 20s, early 30s, through incarceration, like really in my life, period. There was this moment that I thought whiteness was my bridge to whatever like a good life was gonna look like for me. And especially in the space of like romantic partners. And the ways that I leaned into white men and this idea of what white men do that Black men don't do, and all these things we hear people say, girl, stop messing with him, get you a white man. First of all, 20 years of emotional trauma and relationships from white men. They lie, they cheat too, and they're gonna call you a nigga when they get done doing it. Like it's more, sis. Two, in a space where I am now, where I'm like 6 years into being completely invested in loving Black people, in relationships, in community, period. I had to really reconcile these fears around being a Black trans woman in a world where historically when Black trans women are being murdered, it's involving a cisgender Black man. And also refusing to divest from this idea that the person that I am going to, and I say person, like I'm as a person who is attracted to masculinity. And I appreciate what Max said, because the ways that I see masculine presenting folks, period, show up in the space of Black masculinity, Black manhood, whatever that feeling is, I'm dedicated to loving someone in that way. And these are the people who I'm being told are the people who are most dangerous to my existence. The reason I'm being told at 39, I'm beating statistics on my existence. What do I do? How do I balance these? When I've got my Black trans sister saying, girl, you're never going to get a Black man to take you out. You better get you a white man if you want to be taken on a date. How do I fight these things? And how I do it is because the number of chances and opportunities I've given white people in my lifetime that they were not deserving of, they did not appreciate, they did not utilize. There is this book called, I'm not gonna cry, there's this book called 70 times 7. And I was in a solitary confinement cell for 18 months. And in the last 6 months, I was on the death row gallery in Nebraska, and I got this book. And I believe I guess it's based on this passage in the Bible where it's like forgiveness is based on like this idea of 70 times 7, but it's essentially like limitless. So what I think about in those hard times is I think and I try to calculate all the times I let white people talk to me in a way that was harmful to me simply because of my skin color. The times that I allowed white men to engage with my body in a way that was not safe, that was not centered in my joy and respect. The ways that I've seen, the casual ways that white women will push the door in my face when I walk in the nail shop. I put it all together and I multiply it by the biggest number I have, and that is what I'm going to give Black people at every chance. Because y'all are essential to my existence. And so I don't have a choice. If I want to be as free as I deserve to be, I need y'all. And so a product for white supremacy is a world where I think I can forgive a white man 10 times and a Black man can't text me back the next day and he's blocked. That is a product of white supremacy, this idea. We're not holding each other to a higher standard. We're looking for every opportunity to push each other away, to cancel each other out. And so the answer is I had to do a lot of my own work. I had to understand that I'm skilled at organizing in the work, but Dominique, you got stuff in you that is going to prevent you from having the best and most powerful bonds with your community, your Black community, that will then position you to not get to the goal you say you want to have. You got Black people giving their entire lives for Black liberation, but you a Black man to talk about Black liberation all day and white supremacy, and you go home and you lay with a white woman? And I say that because I have incredible friends that are in biracial relationships in many ways. And I'm like, if this is the stress that I feel at work, I can't imagine laying next in this body right now. I can't imagine going home to a white man and being like, I need to talk to you about the microaggressions you engage in today. I need to talk to you about what your mother did. I need to talk. I'm not I can't, I ain't. So I would rather deal with somebody who ain't shit, but I don't have to explain to them why them sweeping my foot in the kitchen is a problem, compared to dealing with the same shit with a white man. And I got to sit there and put you through a whole YouTube tutorial about how you got to go around the house and we got to spit on this broom. We got shit to do now. So it's that looking yourself at your grace quotient, and also be intentional about your grace quotient. A lot of us don't have anything for each other because we give it to our white bosses that treat us like shit all day, and then we get home to Black people and we're like, you ain't even got nothing for your Black kids. A lot of these people are, we're talking about in this larger process of like community and organizing, but let's be clear. A lot of these Black queer kids who are in organizing that don't have elders from biological and otherwise are because their parents gave themselves to whiteness all day and they got home at night and they were mean to their babies at night, right? Elders don't have the space to tell you about what does it mean to be in community because they're out here trying to pander to all these white systems. So when this Black young person messages you on Facebook talking about, oh, I just really want to know about the thing, you done paid them dust. We have to be intentional about our grace quotient. We are not limitless. We can have the desire to be so, but that is not our truth. And I love superheroes, but you are not going to turn me into a superhero and under the guise of really you just trying to murder me. Guess what you're trying to do? You want to turn me into you want to turn me into Wonder Woman and you want to shoot me with bullets and you just want to tire me out. And so that's my answer. Create boundaries based on safety, but really figure out what's the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. Think about all of the opportunities and access and forgiveness you've given to white people and institutions and try to corral that back for your people. And think about how much of you have to give daily and be intentional about giving the best and most of you to Black people. And I promise you, you will start to see a shift. I promise you, you will start to recognize that even when I treat a Black person the way I want to love them and they don't treat me the same way, I still feel good about it. Because sis, I gave you the love you deserve. And there may come a day when you have this aha and recognize, as I did, cumulatively, oh my God, there's Black folks that have been trying to love on me this whole time. I just wasn't ready for it. So that's how I hold that space, and that's how I push forward. And also for those who are just like, well, I'm dedicated to Blackness, but I don't. You're gonna get ran down. And that's a part of white supremacy too, is that they make us feel like we are the lone wolves out here. We don't have space to write down any of our strategy. And so we work ourselves to death for 20, 30 years. And then the next generation comes and they think that they're starting from scratch because they don't have any of our intellect, any of our process. We're not there to tell them, well, baby, I saw that and this is what I did, but you're going to put your own razzle dazzle to it. And so you have multiple generations. We all think we're the first ones. There's nothing worse than feeling like you're the only one or the first one. Being an innovator is not as lit as people will make it seem. I want to be a follower. I just want a lit ass leader. Baby, the day that I step down from Black and Pink and I'm following someone in the movement, mighty God, I cannot wait. So I just love my people more than I allow the echoes and voices of anti-Blackness and supremacy to tell me that my people are not worthy of it.
I mean, you know. So I'm not really gonna say much more. I echo, I honor. What I'll say is this. You know, I came out when I was 12, and my mom, you know, she had a couple tears, and then she went to Oscar Wilde bookstore, you know, in the village, bought a bunch of books, you know. Then she went and joined the board of what was then Hedrick Martin Institute, you know, or actually IPLG back then. I don't know if anybody remember that, but you know, Institute for the Protection of Lesbian and Gay Youth, right? That's what it was back then. It became Hedrick Martin Institute. And she decided that we needed to go on a tour of talk shows. Sally Jesse Raphael, Montel Williams, Donahue, Oprah. We went on all those shows. And I was so upset, you know, because I was like, I came out to you, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't think I was coming out to all of New York City or whatever, you know what I mean? And, you know, the audience base of, you know, the Oprah Winfrey show. And I was a teenager, or really I was an adolescent. By this point, I'm 13, 14. And, you know, she told me then, she said, you know, I hear you, but it's not about you. I'm like, it kind of is though, right? It is about me. But she was like, it's not about you. It's about the fact that these shows, you know, they had that period where all these shows were about these white gay teenagers. What is it like to be a white, you know? And she said, we have to get on there and we have to show folks that we have to talk to Black families, okay? We have to get on there and we have to talk to Black families who are struggling, who don't understand, and whose children are being cast out into the street as a result, okay? We have to get on there and show Black communities that this is, not only is it fine, but there is actually a liberatory way to engage with queerness as a Black heterosexual cisgender person. There is a liberatory way to deal with queerness. And my mom came at it as a member of the Black Panther Party. And so this thing, this intersectionality that we're trying, that the movement today is lifting up, right? Where we have this you know, queer and trans folk at the head, at the center of, you know, the movement for Black lives. That's not new, actually. See, because the Black Panther Party actually had plenty of queer people in it, and was being led by plenty of women. You know what I mean? And had trans folks in it. And the thing was, that's not what you read about in the history books because that's not what was documented. But when you talk to the people that were there, that's very much true. And I know them, you know, they were my aunties and my, you know, my uncles and such. So I learned through that experience that one, this intersectionality is actually generational. It's not new, you know. Number two, that even though there is an extraordinary cost, I mean, I think, you know, for those of you who were out as whoever you are at young ages, you probably remember. I don't know. I'm 47, so when I came out, there was not near one other queer person or trans person out in my school. You feel me? I was in the 8th grade. Now that's different now, but wasn't like that then, you know? And I got beat up on a regular basis. I got jumped. You know what? There's a reason people say we know how to fight real good because, you know, we have to fight all day. And so the point though is that throughout all of that, throughout the violence of that experience, it never occurred to me that there was any way or any reason to turn my back. It just never occurred to me because my mother made it very clear, this is the only way forward, actually. You know what I'm saying? There's actually nothing else you can do but confront this. And she explained to me, and I remember this so clearly, and I'm blessed to have had a mother like mine. but she explained to me that the issue here, because she, people would talk about homophobia, we talk about homophobia, transphobia, and all of that. And she would say the issue here is patriarchy. That's the system. That's the system that is deciding what gender should be. That's the system that is deciding how to value and calculate, lives according to their gender rules and norms. Patriarchy is a eugenics-based system. Patriarchy is the problem. And one of the things that was so interesting that she would talk about a lot is basically how, if we as Black people, if we had an agenda around patriarchy as Black people, that would mean something very interesting, right? That would mean that we would be able to simultaneously fight for reproductive freedoms and fight for the rights and lives of trans women. That we would be able to simultaneously engage with, the experience of Black cisgender men in the criminal justice system and the violence that occurs against, Black masculine centered women, right? Like, we could do all of that together. We could do all of that as one part of one struggle if we start to understand it as a struggle against patriarchy, and not in these different silos. They're different experiences for sure, right? And we have different identities for sure. But the structural problem that we are trying to fix in that case is patriarchy. And so I really encourage us to learn, to lean into a structural analysis as much as we lean into an identity-based analysis.
Thank you for that. Thank you for all of those words from all three of you. Just so many things, so many universes, so much richness. We're getting close to the end of our panel, and there is a question from the audience. And it goes a little something like, first, there's a thank you for holding this space in this conversation. Can panelists speak to how queer liberation and Black celebration intersect with disability and disability justice principles in the context of personal or social experience?
I'm just gonna jump in and say I'm not gonna. I feel like I just kind of answered that a little bit to say that, like I said, patriarchy is a eugenics-based system, and it decides what bodies have value and what bodies do not have value, as is white supremacy. And this is at its heart, these things combine with our understanding of the economy, of a class-based economy that creates a ruling class. These systems decide who the world is made for. They decide who the world is made for, what kind of bodies the world is made for. And I think that essentially, my mother had sickle cell anemia from birth. She died from sickle cell anemia at the age of 59. She was disabled by sickle cell anemia in the final years of her life. My wife was disabled by cancer throughout, and was disabled during the last years of her life. I struggle with mobility. And so I feel like experientially, I know that this question of ability and disability is at heart. It's a question about rejecting the eugenics-based, components of these systems of oppression.
I also think there's a mad dash for us to divest from any additional level of oppression that will make us feel less than. So in this world where we know so many beautiful and incredible Black folks that are navigating the world with all these different levels of ability, it kind of feels like when you're in for me, pre-transition, it was you would see Black gay men who well, I'm gay, but I'm not gay like that, or you know what I'm saying? It's we're trying to push out these degrees of it, and we're trying to divest from our people in order to try to be seen as better or try or in order to try to find some worth in ourselves. And I just think it's hard to talk about Black liberation and celebrating our Blackness and not look at there's so much nuance in how we show up when we, especially when we talk about right, this idea of disability. Like when I was diagnosed with ADHD at 37, I remember just really being triggered by someone asking me about my disability. I was like, well, I'm not disabled. What do you mean? Right. And then also that space of, then you on the flip side, you got the girls who want to co-opt all of the idea of what does it mean to be differently abled, and they're not doing those real critiques. So I say that in a spirit of, we are so much more, as Black folks, we are so much more the same than not. And when we talk about like liberation, celebration, I think we need to also talk about like sex and seeing the sexiness and uplifting and affirming like the power of people who are differently able to be sexy and have sex and engage in relationships that way. That I think it's frightening that we are talking, we are blocking ourselves from seeing the beauty, seeing the beauty and seeing the opportunity to experience so many things with different, with different types of folks. Like I think that it's more about us depriving ourselves from that. And we don't think about that enough. So yeah, like it has to be possible. It has to happen. But I think we also just need to talk about it more as like folks who, when we look at the ability kind of spectrum, who have more ability privilege, to think about like, what are our barriers to that? And I don't think we talk about that enough. We talk about ableism, we talk about language, but we're talking about embracing the body of. We're talking about seeing the opportunity in the body of. We're talking about seeing the expansiveness of a body of. And I think that takes some real critical thinking amongst folks who identify as folks who have more privilege in the space of ability, to really meet the truth that folks who all identify as differently abled have shared with us of how exclusionary many of the ways of celebration and community engagement don't allow them to show up as themselves.
I'll just say real quick, because I know we're short on time. That I think that there's no possibility of Black liberation that also isn't thinking about disability justice. I think, first of all, whether we're looking at it from the lens of white supremacy or the lens of patriarchy, but both systems create disability through environmental racism, through war, through a number of other systems, and also kind of circumscribes and controls the bodies of people who are disabled, right? So everything from the histories of forced sterilizations to, which happen to disabled people as well as Black and brown folks as well, right? So I think, yes, I think about it from that lens. And one of the things that I kind of growing concerned about just as doing public health and HIV work is kind of seeing the ways in which folks in our community who we know are, for a range of reasons, many of them historical and or personal, have various suspicions of the medical industrial complex, as we call it, but all of which is valid. But there's a kind of an underlying dynamic that I see happen with friends of mine who are, say, living with HIV and disclose to friends who then kind of treat them as if they're somehow some kind of stooge of the pharmaceutical companies for deciding to take antiretroviral medication. Friends of mine who've had breast cancer who were treated as they're some kind of like stooge to the medical industrial complex because they decided to get chemotherapy. And then obviously for friends who live with various disabilities who, in a lot of these, kind of conversations about, the various kind of conspiracy theories within the Black community exist around, say, COVID-19 vaccines, for instance. Lots of our folks who have disabilities, need those vaccines to protect them so that they will live, right? Or have a better shot at living. And so there's a great, insensitivity to that and treating folks as if, again, they're kind of some kind of, subjected themselves to kind of white supremacist as a guinea pig because they need to protect themselves based on having a range of disabilities. And so in the space of my public health work, this sort of connection is something that I'm growing to think about and wanting to kind of do more work on, the way in which like sort of ability and able-bodied sort of privilege shows up in the way people think about who accesses what kind of healthcare, what kind of public health measures.
Thank you all for those insightful responses to that question posed from the audience. We are at time. Thank you for everyone who came and joined us this evening for this conversation. Thank you to Kenyon, to Dominique, to Mac, and to Catrick for being here. Thank you, Mia, for moderating and collaborating on this event. Just in case you are interested in the Mid-Hudson Valley, the Newburgh LGBTQ Center has partnered with Rise Up Kingston, and we have created a fellowship for cisgendered Black men as a way for cisgendered Black men to develop a Black feminist lens to combat the attitudes and negative sentiments that are coming at Black femmes, Black queer folks, Black trans folks. We need you. So if you know a Black cisgendered man, this program is a stipended program. We have made sure that there is money for you. We centralize the text of bell hooks to help us start to explore some of this work, including We Real Cool, which is a great text to help support the conversations, hard conversations, to push back against the role and impact of white supremacist heterosexual patriarchy and how it plays a role in our community. This to me is the biggest conversation and the place where the most amount of, at least my focus for some of the work that I'm doing in other spaces, feels very relevant. If someone from the team can drop the link for the fellowship into the chat. We also will promote it on our Facebook page. If you are a Black cisgendered man, we need you. If you know a Black cisgendered man and you love them, please tell them to apply for the fellowship. Again, there is a stipend associated with this fellowship. And this is a collaboration between the Newburgh LGBTQ Center and Rise Up Kingston. And I just want to, again, thank all of our panelists. You know, as host, I don't get my little like emojis on the side, so I can't put up no claps or no like surprise happy thing or nothing like that. So it can be real hard when you don't have that kind of access. And I was feeling all the things that y'all were saying in so many different ways. Thank you all for being here. I know this is not the last time I will be calling on you all to engage in rich conversation. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And thank you for being here with us again this evening.